So today with us we have Dean Bowe. Dean is Hayden's dad, hence why they share the same last name.
It's not just good looks, smarts too.
Yeah. Pleasure to have you here today. We're very excited. For those of you who don't know you, which might be 100% of the people who are listening to this podcast, why don't you tell us a little bit more about yourself and what you do?
Thanks, Stephanie. Thrilled to be here and an opportunity to talk to your listeners. I'm a portfolio manager, so I manage discretionary money, wealth management for high net worth entrepreneurs, professionals, and their families, and help them make intelligent money decisions.
How long have you been doing that for?
I've been doing that, I guess been in the industry about 30 years. In my role, 26. So chosen profession. It's passion, and my formal education's in economics, which I think is a good background in this industry, understanding the inner workings at a macro as well as micro level.
Mm-hmm. The reason why because I thought about bringing him on the podcast is because I think some of the information that you might be able to share for our demographic and our listeners will be invaluable, because we truly don't get that much guidance from professionals in your field that have a legitimate education, legitimate advice to give us. So I think this is going to be so valuable for our listeners in terms of understanding investment, understanding how to manage our money, understanding how to position our money in a way that will be of more value in the future. So I think this would be really, really good.
I also think it's such an interesting time right now for people our age, because it's the best time to be alive and to make money as an entrepreneur with the social media and everything that's going on in that space. But with all that positive comes the obvious negative of people taking advantage of people who are making money and don't necessarily know what to do with it. So, I mean, I'm sure anyone listening has seen this on social media. Now there's all those like bots and people commenting, I just invested X amount of dollars with so-and-so and made 50 grand. And there's like all these basically day trading advertisement sort of spam all over the internet. Yeah. And I thought that maybe you could provide sort of some caution as to why that might not be the best idea, or maybe it is a good idea. And, I don't know what I'm talking about, but I think that's sort of a part of the market that's grown a ton, and they're kind of just passing it off as like an easy, quick way to make money. And something tells me it might not be that simple.
Well, spoiler, there is no easy, quick way. There is a simple. There is a simple, and I think that it's the same in your industry. In the fitness, there's all the, hey, get fit, strong, big, and don't have to put in the work or the effort.
Sure, the 10-minute workouts, get sculpted abs.
Yeah, it's the same. It's patience. There is a simple approach, and the challenge is, as you mentioned with the social media, right now it's like trying to drink from a fire hose. You got to separate the signal from the noise, and I think that's the key, is being able to identify what's the Pareto principle. What's the 20% that carries 80% of the freight? What's the 20% you need to know? And so it starts, I think, with good decision making better decisions. So my superheroes in my industry are Warren Buffett and Charlie Munger. These guys, you can Google that. There's tons of books out on these guys.
The founders of Berkshire Hathaway.
And,
right?
They're the opposite of the type of investment or type of investor we just talked about, right? Long-term value investing.
The principles that they epitomize are, and they run simple heuristics or mental models. And you can identify like four key things. The first one is identifying companies that are first-class businesses. The second principle is that have enduring competitive advantages, that are run by first-class managers. And then the kicker, which is difficult these days, is being able to buy them at bargain prices. And there's a lot built into these. There's a lot of behavioral, cognitive biases that are built into that to protect you. and it has an actual incredible track record of protecting you from losses. You know, that competitive advantage is a moat. You know, and if it's a railroad, it's huge capital investment, legislative. You know, you and I aren't going to go start a railroad tomorrow. You know, a lot of industries, it may be in the structure, it's an oligopoly or a monopoly, or there's patents and brands, and again, it's identifying ones are sustainable. But I also think that there's a lot of confusion out there in the definition of what, and I'll clarify what I do. You know, if we put it on a spectrum, there's betting, gambling, speculating, trading, and investing. I focus solely on investing. So if someone's looking for a get rich quick or a penny stock type thing, not your guy. I'm not denigrating those activities, but and the interesting thing is those activities are differentiated not by what you say you're doing, but in your attitude. So a gambler is not doing it. They're doing it for the dopamine hit, for the entertainment. And unfortunately, a lot of the information we receive today, whether it's through social media or through the press, what it actually does is encourages behavior that is not conducive to investing. It's entertainment. And then that's a big distinction. Is you don't do investing for entertainment. It's a patient, disciplined. It's understanding what the big drivers are. A lot of those big drivers are the binding of time. I want to circle back to that because that's like a really key concept, I believe, and understanding and a little distinction on definitions of assets, not the traditional. So I think there's a lot of noise, a lot of information out there, but it's sifting it down to what's usable, what's important, and focusing on that. And I think that part of that knowledge is self-knowledge, is understanding anybody listening to this podcast that's a human is gonna. We all share the same.
That's most of our audience.
Perfect. Is we're all going to have the same bias. We're all wired the same way, and we are not naturally wired to be good investors. Is all of our we all share, to different degrees, different combinations and nuances. But there's about 150. You can look it up on Wikipedia. About 156, I think it is, cognitive biases or behavioral biases.
Can you define that?
Well, racism's a bias. It's a quick
heuristics.
Heuristic.
Define it as a heuristic.
Yeah, so it's a little systems that we do to take the cognitive load off, making all these decisions during the day. So they're shortcuts. But the problem is with these shortcuts, they're useful. And they do save a ton of energy, but there are costs and it's important to know what those blind spots are so that you can develop processes and checklists that will help to avoid the downside of those.
Can I ask, well, you touched on something I thought was really interesting a minute ago. Why do you think that most humans are not wired to be good investors? And then how do you see that as being applicable in 2020 for young people and older people?
So I think, recognizing our circle of competence was we first of all have to recognize that taking our ego out of it is we're not born natural investors. A lot of our systems were built to survive, saber-toothed tigers.
Biologically.
It's not to navigate.
Thinking about present instead of future.
Right.
Not long-term planning.
Right.
Two ways you can get in trouble, short-term and long-term. And the problem is right now our entire society, all the media that we get is all short term. It's first of all, break all the rules, and I want to get to that as inversion as a tool is spend more than you make. The usual inversion there is how not to be a millionaire. To our society's predicated on dissatisfaction with what we have. So don't be happy with what you've got. Get the latest, greatest, newest thing. You gotta always be getting more and more.
This
and more.
iPhone has 3 cameras.
Yeah, so spend $1,200 on it. Like, you probably don't need that. It's probably not a great use of your money.
I did it.
We're human,
but you know you don't need it.
Yeah, I think this is really important because, as we mentioned right before we started recording, that this expands beyond just investing. This is how humans make decisions, and you're describing behavioral psychology and then behavioral economics as kind of revolutionary ideas that it's clear to us that we don't make rational decisions a lot of the time. And what is driving those irrational decisions are cognitive biases, typically, right? Yeah. So it's so helpful to observe people making irrational decisions and then observe the inefficiencies in the market that produces.
Absolutely.
Right? And that's the opportunity for value creation I think you're describing.
Yeah, and I think part of that is sort of put it in a simple term is, it's smart to learn from your own mistakes, wise to learn from others. Yeah. And if we take a look at these, through history or other people, whether it's looking at a Warren Buffett or a Charlie Munger, and I mean, learning through experience that's an expensive education, both in time and money. So if you can bypass that cost and, build in these, checklists or these heuristics to be able to avoid that costly learning firsthand, I think that's where there's a lot of value. I mean, the greatest wealth you have in your 20s is time, but it's something that people, constantly don't take advantage of. And that gets into compounding. People have a chauffeur knowledge of, if I say, are you familiar with compound interest? Everyone goes, yeah, sure, know it, yeah. But I would say 90 some odd % people don't really appreciate the power. And I think if you don't understand it, it's probably working against you. You really, really want to have it working for you. You could take a lot of burden off. I think now it's so accessible to be a millionaire. It's almost a no-brainer if you let time and compounding work for you and you understand what the basis of investing is. And I think this is a key point that I'm going to probably go down a bunch of different rabbit holes, and feel free to bring me back to finish.
Bring me back to that, because I actually have a question about what you just said a minute ago.
I can't remember what it.
Well, on what you were actually just saying, I think it's really cool. You showed me this earlier. You had it down on a little cue card, and it was all the different rates.
Yeah.
And then the amounts you'd have to put in and years in a chart to get to $1 million.
We'll post that on the show notes.
Yeah, we should. So they'll put it in the show notes. It's really cool because when you think how, if someone's out there and they're thinking, I want to make $1 million, or I want to have $1 million in the bank account, that's such an overwhelming idea.
Right.
But when you can break it down, and I think the smallest figure that you had on there was like, you could put in like $8,000.
And what's the market rate of return?
10% over what time?
Yeah.
And I think that was 50 years.
Yeah.
So I sat down. I'd encourage everyone to do this.
Yeah. And people get discouraged when the market is down 20% because of recession, right? They're discouraged about the volatility of the market, but you don't see over 50 years the average return is actually.
And something that you've always said that I think is great is it doesn't matter to you if those aren't your prices or those aren't your returns. If there's a recession and things are off 20% and you're not looking to sell, who cares?
Yeah.
Your time horizon might be 50 years. And in that case, it has almost no impact on you.
I would like you to get into the difference between what we're talking about and what you're getting into and speculative investing. Is like a lot of people who are our age are like, Bitcoin is the thing.
Or
like
cannabis is the newest one.
Cannabis is the thing. So, like if I just bought it.
So as Hayden, we're having lunch and like I get calls from across the States and Canada. It's CBD oil or it's cannabis. I'm not denigrating the product or the validity. And so here, and this is where it gets back to that. This is all going to tie together. Is that table present value, the essence of investing. When I get those questions, if you understand the essence of investing, is you're doing a present value calculation of future money. So if you have $100 and you say, I'm going to invest that $100, but I'm going to expect to get 110 at the end of the year, that's a 10% return.
And it depends on my internal rate of return whether that's a valuable investment for me.
But if you invest $100 and you're going to get $90 back at the end, it's a negative rate of return, which we're seeing around the world. I see this all the time. So say with cannabis, when you actually don't have, if you don't have you can't solve a math problem with all variables. You have to have some knowns. So let's say you've got these companies, but they don't have any earnings. How are you going to value it? If you're going to do a present value calculation, it's called hope. It's not a strategy.
The confidence in the founder.
So you go on hope. Well, that's one of the metrics that Warren Buffett and Charlie Munger would use. Again, that first being, is it a first-class business? Is it managed by first-class managers? Does it have a sustainable? And that's the question I'd ask with the cannabis. What's the sustainable comparative advantage of any of these individual companies? There'll be a consolidation. There'll be some survivors. But, and are you getting it at a bargain price? And this is where it ties into that table is, so if you've got no earnings and you're going to invest at $100, what's your expectation a year out, 3 years, 10 years, 20 years?
Didn't you say there were some single cannabis companies were worth
some
more than like the entire automotive industry based on their valuations?
Right, and that's not a new phenomenon. Like, why don't people make those sound decisions? Remember, I think it was the Dutch East Trading Company that would have been
tulip bulbs.
Yeah, tulip bulbs. It
happened in Canada. It was Nortel in the '90s, telecom bubble.
It's John Maynard Keynes' Castles in the Sky. Right?
Yeah,
it's a
I think we're talking about this and it's bringing up a very vivid recent example of like WeWork, right? So they were they were kind of the exact unicorn of bad confluence of events that kind of led to their collapse recently. So what's your opinion on what happened? Maybe not specifically what happened with them, but that model of investing, which is very prevalent nowadays with VC funds and tech money out there.
I think it's interesting, and we're seeing it. It's the sharing community. I think the concept is shifting from there's an article we can put in the show notes on from the smokestack industry. What's happening again, and this is going to come back to 3 filters I want to address, is numeracy, is understanding that with a lot of these new tech companies or, Uber's, WeWorks, they're investing a lot into research and development. If you understand at an accounting level how research and development is, first of all, it's an expense in that year, in the year that it's incurred, but it doesn't show as an asset. Whereas if you compare it to the smokestack economy, which would be investing in real estate and capital
railroads
equipment
or aluminum or something.
Well, it shows, if you invest $1 million, it shows on the balance sheet, but the expense is amortized over, written down over a few years. So as a lot of these tech companies are ramping up and they're spending proportionally more and more in R&D, metrics like PE ratios and things, when you're comparing the two, are no longer have the same validity.
And they're not profitable, and investors are tolerant of that lack of profitability.
So I run algorithms and screens and managing my portfolios. And first of all, where in order to do that calculation of investing is I want to see that an expected return. I'd like to see it grow, and you want to have it across diversified sectors, companies, so not all your eggs in one basket. But as you're building or constructing these portfolios, all you're really doing is, and on that little chart that Hayden referred to as just for fun, and you take out your cell phone and you can do it on the financial calculation. The formula is PV equals C divided by 100 plus I being the interest rate in brackets to the nth power. So if I were to say, if I wanted to calculate the present value of $1 million,
current value
at a rate of 10%, that would be 1.10 in 35 years to the power of 35.
That's the number of times it's compounded.
Well,
a number of periods you generate 10% interest, which is
that's right.
Compounded. Yeah.
And so then you'll get a number, and then you can actually calculate and say, what's the present value today at that rate over that time period? So if I were to say, so the little table I did is I said at 10%, what's $1 million? What would you have to put up now to have $1 million in 40 years? Well, it's $22,095.
But if you even just go over one more box, 10 more years, it's
50
a huge
years.
difference.
So you guys are all in your
It's like
20s.
$8,000.
Yeah.
So let's say we went out 50 years out. So if you put 8,519 away now, if you were compounding that at a rate of 10%, you're going to have $1 million. I mean, $1 million is attainable. Now, again, this is simple. This is on a ceteris in economics, a ceteris paribus assumption, all things being equal.
Yeah.
There's risks of legislation, default, you know, in your portfolio, you might, so this is making an assumption you're getting 10 every year. You might get 15 one year, you might get 7, you might get 0, you know, different years. But if it averages out, and I would like to talk about, there are some fun with number little things that I'm sure
People can do at home.
you can do at home. You probably like rule of 72. So if you say I'm getting a 10% rate of return, how long will it take to double? Well, you just divide 72 by 10 and then 7.2 years. So every 7.2 years, your money's going to double at 10%. So you can go out and say, hey, if you're 30 years old and you want to know what would it grow to by the age of 60, you can just quickly do that. And you can work it backwards the other way. If you know the time period.
I do want to circle back actually to one thing, was when we were talking about cannabis companies, and I think a Bitcoin is another one of them, sort of those like flashy new things that come out and everyone's, there's a lot of buzz around them. They're hyped up like crazy. If investing directly in them isn't a great option, is there a way that you can sort of still get a piece of the action that those companies are creating without taking on the risk of
secondary
those
thinking
companies?
is you go, you know what, it may be a thing, just like the internet was, but there are ways to indirectly play it without speculating on who's going to be the survivor. And so the indirect way to do it, and I kind of said with clients tongue in cheek, companies like Couche-Tard, which down here in the States would be Circle K. They bought Circle K. They consolidated a lot of the convenience stores. And I'd say, hey, you know what? Munchie's distribution, and Couche-Tard has put its name up in Canada for, distribution as a dispensary, Shoppers Drug Mart up in Canada, which would be a CVS down here, or Walgreens. There are ways, these are just products that, you're also seeing big beverage companies that are taking stakes in some of the larger surviving cannabis companies that they'll, for, I guess, CBD, and it's just going to become the pharmaceuticals will get involved. So rather than direct plays, you can participate maybe through companies that are paying dividends that are actually, you can do a calculation on what a, present value or expected rate is, and you can still participate, but without the volatility or the octane. The problem is with a lot of these companies, when you lose sight of what the actual exercise in investing is, and I'll go back, this was in the 90s with Nortel, it was trading at multiples of like 300 times trailing earnings. And you go, what is that? It's become so abstract that people lose touch with what it actually means. So if you were a you were a sports bottle manufacturer and you're going to sell your company to a competitor, there'll be a multiple. They'll say, well, you know what? Maybe they'll pay you 2 times or 3 times the last year's earnings, which means that entrepreneur isn't going to take any money out of that company for 3 years till he pays it off, till it breaks even. Different industries will have different multiples. So, banks might have an 11 times PE. It varies. But when you see companies that are trading at 300 times trailing earnings, well, what does that mean? You're going to work in that. How many generations of your family are going to work in that company without taking any income before it's paid off? And
300 years is a long time.
So it's
that's the owner, right? Assuming no growth of income or of earnings.
Well, basically, if you're saying, hey, if I'm just going to pay the company off first before I'm taking anything out.
Yeah. For example, my understanding is Tesla is trading, especially right now at its peak stock price at a PE that's enormous compared to other car manufacturers, and it's based on the possibility of future growth.
But they're taking kind of a different strategy than at least I see with WeWork, where WeWork was massively inflated based, but there's a lot of similarities, right? They're very based on the personality of the founder and their vision of the future of the company. Where you're right, like I'm a member of WeWork. I think it's a very interesting concept, but their valuation deflated and collapsed completely.
Well, the
before
valuation
they went
was
IPO.
$60 billion.
Right, but there was a lot of very bad underlying factors that made the valuation go way up, and then once people were able to see through it more transparently, like, do you think Tesla runs that same risk, even though they're very much betting on climate change being a differentiating factor for them? Maybe that's their competitive advantage for their industry, where they know the world's going to have to shift energy production in the next 100 years.
I'd answer that by saying I'm absolutely philosophically rooting for them.
Yeah.
I don't have any money invested or client money invested in it. I think the challenge, and this recurs in all kinds of industries, is, you know, if I had a decision in the next couple of years of buying I'd probably buy a hybrid vehicle, and I'd rather buy a Mercedes with a diesel and electric option, rather than, nothing against Tesla,
Just out of convenience for charging it.
you know, and I think you're going to see, and also, I mean, that's how locomotives run, is their diesel engines with their diesel, but they're diesel fueled, so it's just sipping a little bit of diesel fuel to keep
With
those
the generator.
generators.
It's like
going.
a Chevy Bolt or some of the more recent electric vehicles the big three have put out.
So I mean, you had an experience, and again, not bashing Tesla, beautiful cars, love them, I'm rooting for them, but it's the actual, how does that map into what you need the vehicle for? If you're going long distance, recharging the time.
I guess my
we missed a
question
flight
was,
because of it, because we rented a Tesla and it died on us on the way to the airport.
oof.
And then we had to sit there for an hour while it recharged.
You rented a Tesla. Did where you were staying have a charging station?
No.
You had to go find one.
Yeah.
That's terrible.
Yeah. And it was confusing too, because there's other electric car companies now that have their ports also in like mall parking lots. So the first thing we did, we went to whatever the mall parking lot, and I'm trying to jam this basically a square peg into a round hole for like 10 minutes. And then I'm finally, I look up at the thing and it's like
oh,
a
God.
Toyota or whatever, station. So like, and we had to go find the Tesla one, and we ended up waiting an hour, missing our flight. It was a whole production.
So I think the bullet point on a lot of these things is, I would say I'd rather not be the early adopter. I'd rather let everyone else iron out the wrinkles, and once the infrastructure's there, then I'm okay with coming late to that.
That's
a
a
little
big
later.
theme, right? The first to market gets
Apple's a
you
good
get
example.
sacrificed. The second to market reaps all the benefit of.
Well, look at Apple.
Yeah.
Apple just perfected the phone. They didn't invent, or they weren't the early, and the same with some of their earlier products too. So sometimes you don't have to be the first one out, and a lot of times they're not the.
Amazon wasn't the first e-commerce bookstore.
No.
You know, I want to hear more of your thoughts about how to distribute risk, and in that kind of pursuit of creating this asymmetrical, rational decision-making framework where you try to maximize return at the minimum possible risk.
Yeah.
Because I think that means investing, that means diversifying.
So if we go, that's one component. So first of all,
like what else is in that equation?
Invest only when you have edge. Diversify otherwise, and realize most of the time you don't have the edge. And this goes back to, like, you know, all these people talking about day trading. It's like, well, not sure what edge they think they have, what competitive advantage that they have over the pros. As a pro, I would never encourage anybody to be a day trader.
Day trading is when you do like your own stocks, like you go to the stock market and you buy stocks. And
you make short-term trades,
like you buy and sell over the
they're not investors.
Period or day period.
They're trading.
they're
And
trying to take advantage of changes in prices. They're trying to arbitrage.
But your industry loves those people, right?
Love them. I mean, that's easy alpha for us. It's kind of like if you're going to divide the smart money and they provide liquidity, which is great. Part of my job for my clients is to provide liquidity to the impatient, which means we'll take the cash and we'll we'll take the other side of a lot of those transactions. And again, because a lot of those day traders are going to be susceptible to that list of heuristics or biases, you know, and a lot of day trading, if you're going to epitomize it in one heuristic, it's the placebo effect. It's the bias to take action. They want to do something. But a portfolio can be like a bar of soap. The more you touch it, the smaller it gets. And it's using the right scale. It's kind of like, imagine we just did the trip from Toronto down to Florida, but imagine if I was referencing it in terms of inches. I mean, how many inches have we gone? How many more inches to Florida? It's the wrong scale. Imagine in your industry, if every house you sold to a client, you put a ticker tape over their door, and every night they came home, they looked at the price of their house. And it's like, well, it's not your price. It's not your prices. It's only 2 times, when you buy it and when you sell it. They're probably not going to call you and say, sell the house, we're down 10,000 on the day. You know, but they get that the time, you're using the appropriate time horizon. Same with investing. Day trading, it's not investing. Investing, you're using, I'd even argue, the good news, bad news of all this technology, and you can look at it amplifies the heuristic or the bias, the placebo effect, the take action. You're looking at it, where it's kind of like planting an acorn because you want an oak tree 40 years from now, but you dig it up every couple of days to see if it's growing. So it's recognizing those things and protecting yourself against them, and reminding yourself, use the proper scale, the proper time horizon.
Can you define what you mean by placebo effect in terms of making these types of decisions? Because we typically define it in the context of the effect of a treatment on a patient.
Oh, right. So, right? Okay, so, yeah, different. So
yeah.
It has the same thing. It has a.
You think doing something is going to cause an outcome?
Right. You think that doing something is better than doing nothing, but a lot of times the patience
and you expect a return because you did something.
You get your dopamine. You did something. You fiddled with. You changed this. You sold that. You did a bunch of short-term things,
and it's independent of what you do, right? Because you can do anything and get the same benefit. Right, it's not a specific effect of the decision you made. Right, which is what it has in common with the medical.
It's not a good decision, and it's. So I see that a lot because, if I'm sitting with cash, I get more heat for having cash on the sidelines because people's normal bias is you're not doing anything. It's like, well, you could just throw it into the market, but if I'm violating that fourth rule is getting them at bargain prices, what's the point in overpaying for something? I'm undermining the ability to generate those returns over time if I overpay now.
Yeah. That reminds me of why people are bad at poker. Because you see great poker players fold before placing a blind way more often than not, because they understand that same concept, which is why poker is an interesting model for making decisions.
Resulting is another heuristic.
But in poker, they're like, I have this hand, it has a certain probability of performing well. Do I pay for the right to play this hand? And they often say no, right? Because it's more expensive to play a lower value hand, right?
I don't know if have you read Annie Duke's book?
That's what I'm referencing. So good.
Great takeaway from her book is the concept of resulting, which I include as one of the.
I love her idea of backcasting. I want you to explain what you think of that.
Of that which?
Backcasting. Instead of a priori assuming certain things are going to happen, looking backwards from the results of your decision and trying to guess whether that was the right decision based on
So what you're focusing on is the process. So the analogy I would use is
the 2x2.
It's kind of like if you and I are both heading here to the gym. You get here 10 minutes before me and you say, well, you know what? I just blew through five stoplights on the way here. And the first one you go through, you judge the merit of that decision based on the outcome, which is resulting. And you say, well, that works. So you do it again. And then you do it again and again. And you get here, but you didn't get tagged either by the police or in the accident.
It was a bad decision, good outcome. And there's a possibility that you could have a bad decision, bad outcome. And so you want to make sure that you're not judging right and wrong versus correct. And investing is being Yeah.
And just like, as you said, a good poker player is being correct, is having a good process, not, and again, that it feeds into overconfidence, is when people take luck and ascribe it to skill and think, well, and that gets into the day trading and it gets into all these other
people who have the hot streak at poker inevitably lose all their money. Right.
Well, again, and that's like probable, if they think about statistical replacement and that gets into, and I don't know if we mention it. Am I talking too much?
No.
That's why you're here.
Is three things that I think are in terms of the decision making is literacy, numeracy, and ecology. And under literacy, what are the words? Are they the right words?
What are these? The three filters?
Three filters that I think you use across life. And if you habitualize them, you can use them in everything. To me, it's how to build I'd reframe it and say how to build a good BS detector. And I think that's critical in every decision, whether it's investing or anywhere in life. So what are the words? So literacy, what are the words? Are they the right words? Are they the best words? Numeracy, what are the numbers? Has time and repetition been taken into consideration? Do they scale? A lot of things don't scale. And ecology is, and then what? You can't just do one thing. It's all interrelated. So when each of them has part of the map of reality. If you use all three, they give you a much clearer interpretation. So I think it's important in investing, and you use all that. And the numeracy is a huge part, thinking probabilistically.
That's a big thing that we don't see I don't see it in clinical practice, or you don't see it in people.
Nobody talks
in training, right? No. That we don't have we have a lot of random effects in the world. We don't have absolute knowledge of things that influence events. So we can only think probabilistically, right?
So you said, how do you protect, big part of investing is risk management, diversification. So probabilistically, again, you can look at it and say, I don't want to have all my investments in one industry or one company or, overweighted in this. So now and that probabilisticness is also, I think you can tie back to the cannabis and the other things, is when you're trying to value or you're investing in a company that you don't really have any measurable metrics. They're all variables. They're all, it's kind of like swinging at a pitch while it's still in the pitcher's glove. You've got nothing to go on. You don't know how fast it's coming, or whether it's in the strike zone. And really in investing, what you want to do is wait for the fat pitches. Wait for the ones that you can, it's right in the sweet spot. And those are the ones that you're going to swing, you're going to go
Wait
in.
for the fat bitches?
Sorry?
Pitchers.
Absolutely. That's what your mind took out of that whole conversation. Wait for the fat
Maybe I didn't
chicks.
explain that clearly enough.
Pitching.
So I know we touched on this a little before we started, but I think a lot of people, whether they're just getting into the market, they're starting to invest money, or they're in their 20s, and right now is a very, very vibrant time to become an entrepreneur, to start a business. Maybe not even, I think the word business person and entrepreneur, they're not synonymous in my eyes, because running a successful business and being a successful entrepreneur ultimately leads you to the same goal. But a lot of people are in their 20s now or 30s, and they're interested in doing those things. They're interested in starting a business. They're interested in becoming an entrepreneur. And I'm really curious to hear your opinion on, going back to what you said at the beginning of the podcast, what are things that people could be doing? Because I was an economics student myself. The macro is amazing, but the micro to me is the most actionable source of discussion, right? So I love practicality. I love hearing people's thoughts on what is practical use of your time in your 20s or your 30s when you're first starting out, or maybe you even have a job and you want to figure out what to do with your money in order to guarantee liquidity, as I would see it, over the next 30 to 50 years. So
I would say first thing is just simple is, I'm not advocating that, hey, you put everything to the future, but you take a piece. So let's say it's 10%. You develop the habit of putting aside, being kind to your future self, realizing that I think Tim Urbane has a website, Wait But Why, and you can take.
What is it?
I think it's called Wait But Why.
Wait, but why?
And he has one where he takes, there's 52 boxes across the top, 90 down the side, and that's your life. And then you go down your years.
Because 52 weeks per year.
For 90 years.
That's a bold estimate of some people's lifespan.
Sure it is.
It's optimistic.
Statistically, it's 82.
Yeah.
But okay, let's just say with all the advances in science and you guys are working on all these things that, hey, we extend that and we go 90.
The opioid crisis has brought it down a little bit.
But okay, you could take it and just do it to the 80 or wherever you are. And we don't carry a number in our heads.
Let's not get lost in that part.
But you go, hey, so if you're 27, boom, you go in there. At first it's sobering. You go, I mean, I'm 56. And they going like, yikes, that's more than half. But it's sobering in that not only here's what I got left, but if we take traditional people retiring at 65 and you live to 90, well, good news, bad news. Good news is we're living longer. Bad news is you got to fund a lot longer period of time.
Right.
So the earlier you get started, the exciting thing is you can very easily accumulate $1 million by putting away systematically, whether you're just looking at total return, dividend paying, good blue chip companies over time. So one of those fun with numbers is if you decided that you needed 100,000 in retirement or 50,000.
I think that's the first leap that you have to make.
Sure.
Is for a 20-year-old to think about retirement.
But do that exercise with the 90, with your life in front of you as a finite thing, because we tend to not want to think about it.
Put it on a spreadsheet makes it very real.
Right. So it's forever, but it's like, boom, there it is. There's your life. Here's where you're at. Here's what you got left. You're probably going to spend 8,000 days in retirement. What are those 8,000 days going to look like? Well, hey, best way to know the future is to create it yourself. And you start doing that by funding it and putting it aside and letting it grow. Let time do the heavy work versus, you probably, and you can Google it, the example, 2 20-year-olds put away 5,000. They start, the one puts 5,000 away for 10 years and stops. The other one waits to they're 35 and then they start putting the 5,000. They'll never catch them. And then you start looking at, well, how much more money do they have to put in for 25 years instead of that 10? And you start to, it's another way of looking at that table. I prefer this table that because we're bombarded all day long with spend, buy, if you had this up in the corner of your mirror and you were looking at it and you're going, hey, at 10%, 50 years out, if I'm a 20-year-old and I'm going 870, if I put away 8,519, well, maybe I buy that used car, put that extra 8 away, and there's my $1 million by the time I'm 70. Well, how many of those do you want to have set aside over time? So if you reframe it, but no one's doing that out there because it's,
do you know of do you recommend tools? I know they exist that nudge people to make the default decision to put money away as they spend money.
Sure, if that helps you do it, absolutely.
I know there's something like Acorns. There's probably several others.
There's a ton of them out there now that.
Right, because I think that's the thing. It's the making the decision part over and over again that's hard for people. Right. If the default decision is to invest.
But that's why I'd say it's even smarter. You make the decision once.
Yeah. So you set it
on autopilot.
Yeah, set and forget, right?
So it's taken right off your paycheck or it's automatic transfer.
Really tough for people in our generation honestly, like you look at social media every day, you look at Instagram. If you like watches, oh my God, your whole Instagram is going to be full of a new watch every single day or a new pair of shoes or something that is, and it's so in your face.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people in our generation and maybe even older are having a very difficult time with that unbelievable amount of attention that they're giving.
It's an unfair fight.
It's gotten so crazy that you can actually finance shoes now. If you want to get hot new kicks and you don't have the money, you can pay for it over a year.
So again, so flip that around at what percentage rate, and now all of a sudden you've got compounding working against you. If you're carrying credit card debt, it's
even student loan debt.
It's like, so here's the thing so there's probably a lot of people out there too. They're going, I don't want to think about it. I got student loan debt.
Yeah.
I'm carrying credit card balance. But it's an interesting concept, or all the other things people say, I'm not disciplined enough. Well, we're all 100% disciplined to our existing set of habits. And to me, that was very liberating epiphany years ago is is the successful or the wealthy just have better habits. Here's a little fun with numbers. If you take your age, multiply your pre-tax income and divide by 10, and then take a look at that number.
Multiply it by what?
Take your age times your pre-tax income
divide by 10.
and divide it by 10. So this was from a book years ago, Millionaire Next Door.
Mm-hmm.
So you're either a UAW, a AAW, or a PAW. Under accumulator of wealth, an average
United Auto Workers.
Love making cars.
An average or prodigious.
Mm-hmm.
So you want to be in the latter. And a lot of people are going to look at that and go, I'm not even close. So the first thing is you got to take action.
We should throw up the numbers that qualify you for each one in the show notes also, so people can check that out.
Yeah, where people can find it. That's super interesting. I've never heard of that myself.
Well, it's just going to be whatever your age times your pre-tax income divided by 10. That's your number.
But what value puts you in each category?
That number.
Why are you dividing by 10 other than just to take a zero off?
So, okay, so let's say you're 27 years old and you're making $100,000 a year.
Yeah.
So that's 2.7 million divided by 10 is 270.
Okay.
So
that number,
if
you have it,
if you're under,
you're
at it, you're average, and if you're above it, then you're the PAW.
Oh, so that's the baseline.
That's your own benchmark.
Okay.
So it's going to be
you're above your age multiplied by. Okay.
Yeah,
and that's the amount of money you're putting away.
That's how much you've got saved.
Okay.
That's not what your house is worth.
Total
that's not the rate of savings. It's how much you have total saved.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense.
So it's just it's a benchmark.
Okay, makes sense.
It's kind of a fun number to look at. So you can either get discouraged by it, or you can say, you know what?
So it assumes that you need to accumulate 10% of your wealth essentially for making up for the years you were a child.
So it becomes more meaningful, obviously, the more years you're in work, but it's an interesting benchmark. And they took this they did a whole study on millionaires, different types and how they got there. And, but it's another fun with a benchmark, fun with numbers. I think I got kind of off on a,
we started off talking about how, someone starting out was Marcus's original question. What would be your advice to them, maybe in terms of how they could get started with either investing or whether investing is the best option for them, or
becoming an entrepreneur.
So
how do you change the sorry to cut you. How do you? I had this thought just now. We were talking. How do you change the framework of somebody's habits and decision making processes when they're so let's say you are one of those people that's like your life is you're spending and you're going out to dinner, you're going out to bars, you're going to buy drinks, you're buying clothes every week, and your mind is not the framework of your mind is not geared toward the way that you think or you look at it.
So you're a normal human being. It's an unfair fight because you've been bombarded everywhere you look with all those messages.
We're living in a tough time where that's the reality.
So you need an antidote.
Yeah.
To me, I think the antidote is to reframe it and remind yourself to be kind to your future self, and to be able to say, you know what, I'm not going to not participate. You're going to find your level, but once you change your assumptions, you change your perspective, you change your reality. So the first thing is you got to change the assumptions. So right now the default assumptions are you got to have and do all these things to be validated in society.
Right.
By
resulting. You're resulting.
Right. So but now to change that assumption and say, you know what, you start reframing, you start looking at an alternative. So if you're looking at a decision, you're going, well, I could, you see that it's more accessible than this overwhelming out of reach number. And you also don't get frustrated. There's a concept called the gap. It's the same with working out. Is you go, here's my ideal, but your ideal is like a horizon. As you approach it, it's always moving away. It's why you see people that seem to be successful, but they're always unhappy because they never ever they never reach their goal.
They're relatively deprived of their goal.
They're caught in the gap.
Yeah.
So it's kind of, I don't know if you've ever been to London on the mind the gap.
Yeah.
So to me, that's wise life advice. Mind the gap. We all can get stuck in there. Well, I think Seth Godin calls it the dip.
Do you think that that's like a problem of ever escaping goals and desires as opposed to having a
No, I think it's
concrete set, like, because all right, let's take it back to fitness, right? Every one of us in here have a number in mind that we want to squat, bench, or deadlift, right?
Right.
And in business, I think you could also apply it. And once you reach those numbers, like I set one out for myself every year. And like, let's say it's in business or it's in the gym. This year I set out 3 of those goals and I accomplished 2 of them, or last year, right? And it's very easy to look back now and be like, okay, cool. I hit those 2 goals. They were massive for me. And I feel very accomplished as a result of that. And what you're saying about this gap idea is like, yeah, I hit them, but I really wanted 390 kilos or like a 400 kilos.
Or once you reach that goal,
you're unhappy.
Now your goal becomes something else.
So you want to measure progress, not perfection.
Mm-hmm.
So you go, I started the year benching 200 pounds.
Right.
I wanted to get to, pick a number, 250, but I ended up at 240. So you could be pissed off, bummed out that you didn't hit your goal, you're a failure. Or you could say, hey, I increased by 20% my bench. That was progress.
That's huge.
And then you reset your thing. The same thing with investing or saving, investing, paying off that student loan, measure your progress, and then try to just keep ratcheting that up.
So aside from saving, do you think, how could somebody who's starting out either find an advisor or get advice for themselves or figure out how to invest? Like, would you recommend one that somebody goes and finds a financial advisor or a portfolio manager? Should somebody just walk into the bank and let the person at the bank, help them pick packages, investing packages there? What should someone who wants to be proactive but doesn't know a lot do?
So the good news, I think, for a lot of, here's the reality and the challenges. The way the industry is structured is,
where do I find the hedge fund to give all my money to?
That's not that's what you don't want. Oh, so we're inverting. Yeah. That's how to not become a millionaire. So what you want to do is, first of all, is build out that robust BS detector. You got to be able to ask some questions. You have to understand incentives to be able to ask understand how whoever you're dealing with is being compensated. Like anything, you want to, whether it's a personal trainer you're looking for, there's a compatibility. You've got to be comfortable talking to them. I think one of the good tests, Hayden and I were talking about this, is if you're sitting in the meeting with the advisor, it should be all about you. So if you're doing a discovery meeting, that first hour meeting should be all about you. If you're getting the sense it's not and it's about them, it's not a good fit. And that relationship.
I remember you told me that once when I was going to interview with a client that called us. Yeah. That was such a powerful way of reframing every client interaction I've ever had since, because now I go into them, I'm not here. I'm just here to absorb your needs and how do I add value to what you do already? Yeah. That's kind of the approach that I found to be very effective, and you take yourself out of the equation essentially.
Yeah, and you're putting them first, you're listening. If you're just telling them about how great you are, then you're not getting an opportunity to understand, because in order to get responsible advice, it's kind of like going to the doctor. They need to do an exam. They need to know
patient-centered, client-centered.
Yeah,
right?
What the issue? What are your issues? They can't just stand there with a
pain points, right?
ladling out amoxicillin.
Oh, they do that.
Not ask you what's the issues.
Yeah.
So to me, you do want a relationship. You need to be aware. Not denigrating the banks. They're like tools used responsibly for their right purpose. Think of if you go and you buy a mutual fund, it's like you're paying for packaging, it's individual servings. You got a little, for $500 or $1,000, you're getting an instant diversified, potentially portfolio, or buying an ETF. But as you accumulate more wealth, now you can go to private wealth managers where now you strip away that packaging and now you're building out. So I'll build, so my minimums are higher than if you're going to walk into the bank. So normally with clients, ideally it's $1 million plus or several million. I do take smaller entrepreneur people that are doing the right things. And then in my practice, I'm dealing with 4th generations, and sometimes even briefly spanning all 4 generations. So I get to see that time, moving down the line. So it's more a stewardship. And that's what you want to find is an advisor with a steward mentality, not a, they got a hot tip. There's, again, you need to satisfy yourself.
You don't want George Costanza's guy.
You don't want the gambling, the speculating, the day trading. If you are trying to think of this as you're putting together this is just one goal, is talking about your retirement. And as you say, that's one of the furthest stuff. It could be saving up to purchase your home, or, same principles. You don't want to be gambling, speculating, for any of those things. And you want to make sure that your time horizons are sufficient, that you want time to be your friend, not your enemy. So you don't want to, or matching maturities. You don't want to be, if you were to come to me and say that, hey, I've got this money, I want to invest it, but in 2 years I need it back, you shouldn't be in the market, period. Because you understand the structure of the market. There's business cycles that can last on average 7 years. You never want to be, whether in real estate, I'm sure you tell your clients, or investing, you don't want to be a forced seller.
No.
So
even like in the real estate business, you're making your money on the buy, no matter what, right? Because if you're in a bubble, prices are going to be speculatively high.
That's your margin of safety, and the same in investing.
Yeah. So like if I'm in the process of buying my own house right now, and like you're always looking at what you're paying for it, and I'm in the appraisal business also, so you're always looking at what are comps selling for. Am I getting a good deal? And like if you're really worried about pinching $5 to $10,000 or $20,000 on the buy, you're not looking at it the long-term view. Because if you're really looking at a real estate asset, so if you're looking at it as an investment, you're looking at it over a 10 to 22-year time horizon, and you can measure it through all sorts of metrics. You can look at your internal rate of return, all sorts of things that can justify, like, okay, maybe I can boost the value of this property in 10 different ways. So if you're really worried about things on the buy side, like as a personal thing, you might not be looking at it the right way. But if you're looking at it as an investment, yeah, it's a little bit more delicate, and you got to take emotion out of it to a degree. But in the real estate business, you're looking at, okay, what is the average rate of return over 20 years, 5 years? And I grew up in a time where I cut my teeth in the business buying foreclosed assets from banks in 2010 to 2014, when things were at rock bottom prices, and I could see the effects of speculation and deleterious effects of the credit markets at the time, and
forced selling.
I mean, these were way past that point, but you could see the effects of kind of a bad business cycle. And if you bought something in 2005, 2008 time period in the U.S., now your prices are back to where they were, if not maybe a little bit higher than the speculation back then. But it just goes to show you, even in a bubble, if you hold out and you're patient over a long enough period of time, your money will stay safe, especially if the fundamentals of the asset are good. And I'm sure it's the same in investing.
Well, I think the same principle applies, is you'll make money over time, not all the time.
Right.
And again, it's having the appropriate scale.
I think it's also a good example of the similar perverse incentives. It's like if you have a financial advisor who isn't aligned with your incentives, they may not even give you the market return. Yeah. So it's like you might as well just buy the packaged ETF.
Which I think is, so I think for some people starting out, the ETFs are not a bad, I think Warren Buffett has said, put half your money in a treasury bill and put the other half in the S&P 500. Yeah. And the reason he says that, it's not
for beginners.
For beginners.
Or don't want to play the game. And
the reason he says that is smart, because a lot of people pick that apart and go, hey, that's not what he does. No, it isn't. But what he realizes is all of the cognitive biases that you have to navigate, in the circle of competence, you're starting out, you don't have an edge or an advantage. All these other things that are ranging from, we touched on resulting loss. There's loss aversion, availability, confirmation, overconfidence. We touched on hurting, familiarity, anchoring.
Loss aversion is a good one for the market. Yeah.
Well, again, and now that loss aversion is you're short circuiting that probabilistic, because now you're placing a greater value on the pain than on the upside. So it's really numerically you've
Yeah,
You've undermined
it. Should be this. It should be the same objectively, but it's not. People are much more afraid of losing, and it's like you can even value it. It's like people might be more afraid of losing than the possibility of gaining 100. Right, losing 50, gaining 100, or losing 10, gaining or people don't do the probability very well. But
so if you go back to like that recommendation of the, so you average it out and you say, what's the S&P done over the last 10, 20, whatever years? And it's always, the caveat always is past performance, not indicative of future returns. But you're getting strong single digit growth. And if half of it's in a treasury bill, you blend those two, you look on the chart and it's like, hey, what's that money going to grow to? It's a great way to seed and get started. And then as you, whether it's through referral or recommendation or talking to your accountant or other professionals or family members that can recommend where and then going in and talking to them yourself to make sure that you're comfortable, that it's a good fit, that you'll get the time and attention, and that we've all got biases too, that like I've shared with you, mine, that's the investing side. So if you came in and said, look, I'm trying to get 20% a year and I want to take big risks and penny stocks and stuff, I'm not your guy, not a good fit. The banks, mutual funds, not a bad place to start, but you've got to understand their incentives too. It's not, here in the States, the good news is, and ideally, if you have enough capital that you can get a fiduciary, you want somebody with a fiduciary responsibility and liability versus suitability. And that's a higher standard where they have to there are consequences, and they do have to prove that they are putting solely your interests first, where under the suitability standard, someone, as long as it's reasonable, that whatever asset allocation and investment you're in is suitable for someone like you with your income, and there is an inherent conflict of interest with the firm and with their own incentives. So if you can get the higher standard, and certainly once you've accumulated more money, you certainly can. But I mean, there's lots of options now, and from Schwab to who's just bought TD Ameritrade. It's a great way to get started. And then just like in your industry, coaching, whether you're a pro, and I think that it's interesting too, the wealthy recognize the most the value of getting a professional coach, which is an advisor, and delegating, recognizing their circle of competence and delegating those day-to-day decisions to a professional that is dedicating full time and attention to that. Did I answer your question on where do you go?
And it kind of brings me to a new question, which I think is, again, like I'm a huge fan of practical advice for people and myself, because I was, I love it. It's such an easy way to kind of reframe your own framework in your mind. And the thing I just thought of, I want to ask you is a lot of people in our generation, young folks starting businesses, trying to invest. What do you recommend to people in terms of keeping cash on hand and of being liquid, in terms of having a savings account? Is there anything that you can recommend to kind of shape the thought process behind that? Because
like a rule of thumb, sort of
a
thing?
rule of thumb, or just a mindset. Because like I said, when I was growing up and I was coming of age, I saw the great financial collapse happen, and it devastated a lot of people. And there was a lot of, especially in the real estate business, there's a lot of very highly leveraged properties that, then you end up in a very tough situation because of that. So
think about it like training. As an athlete, you want to have that margin of safety. So you don't just, you want to know that if you're tackled or hit, you've got a surplus of strength and mobility to be able to absorb that. Well, to translate it into investing would be, you want that additional strength, or that you want to be anti-fragile. So you want to have liquidity. So you want that emergency fund. So rule of thumb would be, ideally you want to have 6 months cash on hand. Sort of your synthetic workaround for that would be a line of credit, so that you're, to bridge you, as long as you're not dipping into that for consuming. And I think that's one way to have it, as an emergency fund only, until you've built up a cash reserve that, whether it's loss of employment, it's illness. Then there's all kinds of other risk management. You get into things like critical illness, disability, life insurance. Hey, you can have the best retirement plan, but nothing will screw it up like dying or getting critically ill or disabled.
So what percentage of bankruptcy is medical bankruptcy?
Sorry?
Do you know offhand the percentage of bankruptcy is because of medical bills?
In the States, I think that's the number one.
Yeah, it's the number one reason. It's something. It's like an enormous percentage.
It's mind-boggling.
Yeah.
The healthcare conversation, you could have that for days.
Yeah, the cost. People.
So again, it's like anything, right? It's like, so you first identify what's important and then what's in your control, and you focus on that overlap on what you can do. So you could spend a lot of time and energy angsting over fixing the medical system, or within your control would be to put aside that fund to have the insurance. And again, that insurance, like life insurance or the critical illness, disability, it's like an instant portfolio. If something were to all it is to replace your earning ability. So if you're married, you've got kids, it's a simple calculation to figure out how much insurance you should have if something inopportune were to happen, to leave your survivor's hole. So again, all it is risk management. So you're planning for that cash reserve should let you sleep better at night, and it's there as a stopgap if there is something that interrupts your regular, unforeseen things. And again, I classify that as being anti-fragile, because you just want to have that surplus capacity there to absorb those unexpected hits.
Preparing for anti-fragile, preparing for black swans.
Right. It's like, they do happen.
Yeah. And also you can engage in healthy behaviors to minimize risks of catastrophic illness, but catastrophic illness
that's where we come in.
Right. Yeah. That's where we come in.
Some people.
That's also an interesting circle back to managing the process, not the result.
Yeah.
Right. We can't control that outcome, but we can change the probabilities by changing behavior. Yeah. And that's what the cycles might have to be about, is what could I do better? What could I have done better?
Yeah.
Whenever we make a decision within a cycle. What I think is, I want to get your thoughts on is, again, right, so we're talking about hedging against risk. We mentioned the real estate bubble and the financial crisis. Large institutions full of really smart people didn't manage risk or didn't adequately measure risk.
Yeah.
How do we
not make the moral hazard issue more than anything?
Yeah, like how do we not make the mistake, not just in our own kind of finances, but in other decisions, and also, like, for example, in our business. Like,
so look at
if you have a business, how do you hedge against the
cash flow? So you look at what led to that, to the 2008. Beyond the malfeasance and the and all the things that broke down.
And I want to focus on, like, for example, Bear Stearns just one day finds out they have, I think it's $30 billion of assets that are worthless, right? And it makes the company. And the next morning, the next morning the company will be illiquid if they don't get a line of credit from J.P. Morgan. Like that. Like that's the situation that I'm imagining.
So again, not calculate.
Yeah.
So if we look at that, I looked at that whole period of time, and that was a
like, what lessons can we learn from that? Because it's not a question of people not having the know-how, right?
So that BS detector, that
were they buying their own BS?
Work on, and not only that is incentives. There was perhaps an incentive to not really. To the numeracy, to actually look at the math and the numbers and all the human nature, that the incentives of the rating services,
everything down to the consumer level during that period
Everyone
was perverse
wanted-
incentives.
Yeah.
I mean,
Everyone wanted to
Greed.
distribute loans,
Fear of missing out.
make them A-rated, underestimate the risk of default, underestimate the risk of cascading default.
overestimate
the-
the value of the
Yeah,
So they
assets.
didn't have that margin of
Yeah.
safety, that
Yeah.
anti-fragile, that black swan
Yeah.
shock absorber to be able to.
Yeah.
I mean, and I don't think a lot of people realize how precariously the world was teetering on the abyss there for a while before it was. And interesting enough, one of the superheroes that came in was Warren Buffett in helping to, provide some liquidity and confidence back into that market. I think how you avoid that is, you've got to ask those questions. The numeracy is to be able to go, does this make sense? Like, does this scale? Problem is that didn't scale. You can't scale that kind of a almost Ponzi scheme type debt, with deteriorating, what do they call them? Ninjas.
No income, no doc loans,
no
basically.
job.
Yeah.
It's
Ninja
like,
loans,
how could
yeah.
that possibly go wrong?
Yeah.
The default
Well, it did
rate.
scale. That's the problem. It was so
You can always,
unbelievably scalable.
you can find,
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Not
the
a good
people
way.
that were keeping it going were incented to, because they were making a ton of money
Yeah.
in issuing that paper. So it's, so how do you protect yourself? Not be overextended, and the problem in real estate is if you're putting 10 down, you're leveraging 10 times. That cuts both ways. In a rising market, real estate's wonderful, but if it doesn't take much to wipe out the equity in that investment.
Well, you always have to make sure that not only, in real estate, if you're buying something for personal or investment, there's so many factors that go into it, but ultimately, are you comfortable with the long-term obligation of repaying that debt?
Right.
Ultimately, do you believe that you are going to be able to repay something for 30 years?
Yeah.
And that's a big chunk of most people's income.
Sure.
And I think that's a very, very practical consideration, because what led to a lot of the speculation back then was an overconfidence that they weren't going to be able to pay that debt. They were overconfident in the fact that the asset itself was going to rise by 20 to 30%.
Yeah.
Which led to a lot of this, kind of like the Bear Stearns type situation where
Where
they're
people
holding
hold-
a lot of paper and
Yeah.
they're holding these collateralized debt obligations and all sorts of things that are suddenly worth a tenth of what they thought it was.
I think Hank Paulson called it a bag of flaming garbage.
Yeah, for sure. 'Cause, a lot of people were holding that.
Yeah. And Lehman obviously was holding the most of it
Yeah.
and closed
No,
as soon as they figured it out.
all were.
Yeah.
Everybody was.
Yeah.
Whether it was a commercial product or residential
Yeah.
product, it's just
So I would say your best defense is quality is so it goes back to that understandable Class A companies. And so the interesting thing through all that, that was a phenomenal time to be. That's where on some of my highlight reels, there was some great opportunities. The Canadian banks all of a sudden became like Swiss banks. They advanced all their plans for growth by 10 years. Companies like Couche-Tard we talked about, convenience stores, they went over to Europe and bought up Statoil's convenience stores.
Yeah.
So they were buying assets for pennies on the dollar. Brookfield Asset Management went around the world scooping up, Class A, the cargo shipping container ports, and refinancing them. So these companies, so it's kind of like a culling of the herd. The companies that have strong balance sheets and have the cash flow to finance their own growth or access to capital markets, they get to swoop in and pick up their competitors.
What does, is it Warren Buffett who says it? Cash is the ultimate call option on every asset?
With no expiry.
With no expiry.
So it's like if you're sitting with billions like he is of cash, well, guess what? He gets better deals. They're not coming to me. They're not going to, Warren and some of the large managers. They do get to see some deals that are at some pretty, and they're sharp guys. They're making sure that they're making asymmetrical bets. They've covered themselves on the downside. So a lot of what Berkshire Hathaway did and their investments were very profitable during that time.
Yeah.
They weren't freebies.
I know Bridgewater made, my dad lives very close to Bridgewater in Connecticut. They made 20 to 30% return in those 2 years.
Oh boy.
Each of those 2 years.
So it's so it depends on your perspective.
Yeah.
I saw investments where guaranteed by perpetual preferreds in Canada. So if you understand the structural the structure of the market in Canada, prefs are predominantly retail clients, which are subject to all these biases, a lot more volatility. So there's a lot of profit tax loss selling going into the end of 2008. So these things were issued at $25. The gap down to $13, which took their yield from 5 to 10 forever, like an annuity guaranteed by the banks and the insurance companies. So to me, it was one of those back up the truck. Who cares if these things ever come? I think they are, but even if they don't, will we be okay with 10% return? You look at your little, when you go forever.
You're always looking for 10% return.
And they can't call these things. They're perpetuals. And by January, within a month, I think they'd come up about 30%. And within that year, they were up well over 80 and traded to north of 25 of the issue. So to me, that was one of those asymmetrical risk, hardly any downside. They were mispriced and understanding the structure. So I think when you do see those opportunities, when you do see those disasters and those things, and I think it's another Berkshire. It's like, hey, you buy when there's blood in the streets. That's when these guys are reloading for their next, that's where they're going to get, that's where they're, that last metric and that 4-step process, buying good companies at bargain prices. And a lot of times they're good companies, but they just may not have the liquidity. They may not have the access to capital markets or the internal cash flow to expand their expansion. So they either get merged or bought out.
Yeah, it's the same thing on the real estate market down here. When the crash happened in 2010 in Miami, developers were buying land. That land was planned, permitted, and redeveloped up until just today. The tallest residential tower in Miami was scrapped in 2007, and they just recently opened as an 850-foot rental tower. It's massive, But every condo building you see here, the land was purchased, planned, and zoned during the downtime. It's the same across all markets, I guess.
Yeah.
Do you have any sort of things that we didn't touch on that you think are worth discussing?
Probably.
You have one funny story that I want you to share before we wrap, and that was you got me one of them actually, the certificate.
Oh, Brex.
I thought that was a funny story.
Back in the 90s, actually, Matthew McConaughey stars in, I think the movie's called Gold.
I know that movie.
So, which to my surprise, it's not like the Hollywood version. They dumbed it down. The reality was far crazier than what they depicted in the movie. I was disappointed. It's like, what? It's like, it was so far off the charts, crazy in so many metrics. But
that's a great movie, by the way. If people haven't seen that, should go see it.
But it was one of these ridiculous things again. I took a lot of heat.
That movie was based on Brex, right?
Brex. So a Canadian gold company where it was fraudulent. It was malfeasance. But it was one of the biggest scandals, certainly at the time.
Kind of like an Enron type thing?
They were lying, they were mining, and they were pretending they found gold to get continued investment from people. And
the Ponzi scheme.
They actually hadn't found any gold at all.
The ridiculous part was the gullibility of so many, but again, fear of missing out. Like all these things.
It's like Madoff. You look at the list of institutional investors in Bernie Madoff's thing, and he wasn't even making trades.
How am I getting these returns?
He's like, but he literally wouldn't make any trades. Like,
what I did back then was I had, I think the story that Hayden's alluding to is I spent all kinds of time, and a lot of part of what I do in my practice is helping coach and protect clients against themselves and their blind spots, and all the reminding them of what the sort of the long-term plan is, and the the policy statements we have in place. But the interesting story was I got a lot of heat. People were getting ticked off at me because I was just a hard no. Like, this doesn't make sense. I didn't know it was fraudulent.
They wanted you to invest in Brex.
They wanted to put money in, and I'm going, no, sorry, I'm not going to do it. And they were getting, it's not what I do. It's I don't want that on my hands. So anyway, long story short, when it did all blow up, you could still, back then you could get physical certificates. So just for fun, for some of my clients with a good sense of humor, I bought them some physical shares and had them delivered out, registered in their name before they completely shut the whole thing down as a souvenir. And I did it for the kids, for Hayden and my daughter Emily. They have certificates.
That's the ultimate "I told you so," though. Here's your bullshit stock.
Hey, for all the grief I had to go through at the time because they were all. Everyone, all their friends were making
That's a
money.
collector's item.
It is.
It's like an Enron.
It's a piece of history. It's history.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Next time I come down, I'll bring it
Yeah, you
down
have to
so
bring
you
it
can
down.
hang it in your office.
It's like a share in that's each trading company.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's a great book, by the way. The Extraordinary Delusions and Madness of Crowds,
Yeah.
which it chronicles like these things. It's like human nature. It's like the vehicles change over time, but it comes around again. It just recurs. It's like what they say, history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. It's the same thing. Just, like whether it's a tech and telecom and, the next bubble, the next thing, and whether it's going to be a cannabis or I do like, again, I'm rooting for, I think that, Bitcoin, that the blockchain technology is going to be in Visa. Everyone's going to be using it, every logistic.
And we talk about using it in healthcare to distribute a common patient record.
But you're not going to buy, you don't want to necessarily buy it. It's all the...
It's like a proof of concept for a technology.
It's like the internet. It's going to be
great.
It's going to be part embedded, and it's wonderful, and I certainly see the merit. But I'd rather buy Visa or MasterCard and trust that this hasn't escaped them, and they're gonna, which is other great companies. But it's probably a ton of stuff I'm happy to share, and whether circling back in the notes or if your listeners find any value in that and want to continue the conversation,
where can people find you?
LinkedIn.
Where's your Instagram?
What about LinkedIn?
What professional?
I got a cardboard cutout on LinkedIn that if you reach out, I'd certainly best efforts get back.
I think that would be the right place to find a financial advisor.
Don't find your advisor in the comments section of my squat video from Jim, who just made $10,000 working with,
or Sergey, who wants $21,000 in his spare bank account with the number.
Oh man,
I can't believe they're actually getting people that actually respond to those things.
So Dean Bowe on LinkedIn, if they're trying to find you.
That's awesome. What a flex.
He has 500 plus connections.
I'm definitely going to connect with you after this if we're not.
Because it's a little different in my industry because you don't put clients up there because a lot of my practice is predicated on confidentiality, and so I haven't figured it out. I need help. Any LinkedIn experts out there that can, navigate the intricacies of my regulatory profession.
Yeah, discretion's key, eh? Same with us.
Awesome. Well, hey, thank you so much for doing that. I think that that's such a great introduction to anybody who's either in a position like maybe we were a few years ago, or who doesn't have a dad who's a wealth management professional. I mean, I have my degree is in international economics and finance, and I still have no idea what I'm doing if it wasn't for him. So, thanks so much for doing that.
Thanks for having me.
That was
Thanks for
awesome.
on. Yeah.